Two rail bridges over a canal in northern Crimea were supposed to be the safe part of Russia's war. Quiet stretches of track near a village called Rozdolne, far from the front, carrying fuel and shells and men south the way they had 1,000 times before. Russian logistics convoys moved toward them without much worry. And then Ukraine's Special Operations Forces posted 4 words that told you exactly where this war just turned. The first one's gone. One of the spans dropped into the canal, and when Russian engineers rushed a repair train to the site to put it back together, Ukraine waited, watched, and hit the repair train too. That's the part that should make you sit up. Not the bridge, the patience. Because a country that destroys a bridge is fighting a battle. A country that lets you start fixing the bridge and then blows up the crane and the crews and the replacement track the moment you commit them is fighting something else entirely. It's fighting your ability to ever recover. And this week, in the first days of July 2026, that logic stopped being about one crossing near one village and started swallowing an entire peninsula. This is Professor Alex, and if you want the money and the maps behind the headlines instead of the noise, take a second to subscribe, because what's happening to Crimea right now is going to move oil, budgets, and the shape of this war before the summer's out. Let me show you why. Start with what a bridge actually is in this war, because most coverage gets this backwards. Crimea is a peninsula. Russia annexed it in 2014, and ever since it has functioned as the single largest staging base for everything Moscow does in southern Ukraine. Ammunition flows through it, fuel flows through it, reinforcements, repair depots, air defense. The whole southern war machine leans on Crimea the way a body leans on a spine. And a peninsula has a fixed, countable number of ways in. There's the Kerch bridge from Russia proper. There's a land corridor along the Sea of Azov coast, and there's a lattice of rail lines and road crossings that thread over the North Crimean Canal to move all of it deeper inside. That lattice is not infinite. You can name the bridges, you can count them on your fingers, and Ukraine has been counting. In late May, Kyiv gave the campaign a name: Logistics Lockdown. Robert Brovdy, the commander who runs Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, went further and said the quiet part out loud: the isolation of Crimea. Not the recapture, not a ground assault rolling across the isthmus. Isolation, strangulation, make every road slower, every rail line broken, every tanker truck a gamble, until the peninsula that Russia uses to feed its southern front can barely feed itself. And here's what separates this from the last 4 years of dramatic drone footage that led nowhere. This time the targets aren't random. They're a system, hit in sequence. June 18th. The rail bridge near Rozdolne over the North Crimean Canal on the Kerch-Jankoy line. Struck. Burning. June 19th. Another near Vladislavivka, one of the key rail junctions in the east through which traffic moves toward Kerch and Feodosia. Then the Chonhar crossing, hit on the 7th, the 9th, the 13th, the 15th, the 21st, over and over, because a bridge you repair is a bridge you have to defend forever. By late June, Ukrainian monitors were counting more than 20 strikes across nearly a dozen bridges in barely 2.5 weeks. Not to knock them all down at once, that's not the point. The point is arithmetic. Every broken span forces a reroute. Every reroute burns more fuel, takes more hours, exposes more trucks to the drones waiting over the highways. You don't have to sever the peninsula. You just have to make moving anything across it cost 3 times what it did in April. And you can see the cost in the most ordinary thing imaginable: gasoline. In Sevastopol, the largest city in Crimea, fuel got rationed to 20 liters a week per person. 20 liters. That's barely a third of a tank, handed out through prepaid coupons that vanished the instant they were released, with drivers lining up for hours. Then, on June 21st, the occupation governor, Sergei Aksyonov, went further and suspended civilian fuel sales altogether. Petrol only for state services, emergency vehicles, the military. Everyone else waits. This is the worst fuel crisis Crimea has seen since Russia took it in 2014, and it landed right at the start of the summer tourist season, on a peninsula whose economy runs on beaches and resorts. Authorities set up a hotline for tourists who drove in and now can't drive out. Sit with that image for a second, because it's the whole strategy in miniature. A family in a car, at a beach, unable to buy the fuel to leave. That's not a battlefield. That's a slow-motion demonstration that Russia can no longer guarantee the basics inside territory it calls its own. Now the finance layer, because this is where it stops being a war story and starts being a market story, and where I want you to be careful, because a lot of channels are about to oversell you this. The obvious threat is oil. Ukraine hasn't just been hitting bridges in Crimea, it's been reaching deep into Russia proper and hitting the refineries, the actual machines that turn crude into diesel and gasoline. And the numbers there are hard to wave away. In the first half of 2026 alone, Ukrainian long-range drones struck Russian oil refineries something like 194 times. 8 of Russia's 10 biggest refineries have been hit. Analysts estimate more than a fifth of the country's total refining capacity has been knocked offline at points this year. The Kapotnya refinery that supplies Moscow's own region took drone hits, and, according to officials cited by Reuters, won't be fully back until at least the end of 2026. The result inside Russia is something Russians can feel at the pump. By late June, more than 50 of Russia's 83 federal regions were under some form of fuel restriction. Gasoline prices posted their biggest weekly jump in at least 20 years, then kept climbing. The International Energy Agency described the level of disruption as beyond anything seen before in this conflict. And Zelensky, framing these strikes as what he calls long-range sanctions, claimed Russia has lost at least $7 billion this year as a direct result of the hits on its oil sector. So the story writes itself, right? Russia's running out of gas, the war economy is cracking, the whole thing collapses by autumn. Here's where I have to stop you, because that's the version that gets clicks, and it's only half true. The uncomfortable part, the part the triumphant versions leave out, is that hitting an oil facility and hurting Russia's income are two very different things. When a drone hits a storage tank, you get a fireball you can see from space. It looks like the end of the world. But the vapors burn off, the tank cools, and often the actual delivery is delayed by a couple of days, not destroyed. What genuinely bites is losing the pumps, the compressors, the loading gear, the refining units, and those are better protected and harder to replace. And there's a bigger offset working in Moscow's favor. Oil is priced globally. When Iran rattled the Strait of Hormuz earlier this year and Middle East risk spiked, the price of every barrel went up, including Russia's. Analysts at Carnegie ran the arithmetic and found that even as Ukrainian strikes cut the physical volume Russia could ship, the higher price per barrel more than made up the difference on revenue. One veteran Russia analyst put it bluntly. U.S. action against Iran effectively rescued the Russian oil sector and the federal budget from a crisis that was genuinely forming late last winter. So which is it? Is Ukraine strangling Russia's war chest, or is Russia quietly banking windfall profits while its gas stations run dry? The honest answer, the one worth your time, is that both are happening at once, and they're measuring two different things. The refinery strikes are hurting Russia's ability to supply its own people with fuel. That's the domestic pain, the rationing, the lines, the political embarrassment. The oil price is protecting the money that flows into the Kremlin's budget from exports. You can have gas lines in 50 regions and a healthy oil income in the same quarter. That contradiction is the actual state of Russia's war economy right now, and anyone telling you it's a clean collapse is selling you something. Which brings me back to Crimea, and to why the bridges matter more than the refineries for what happens next. Because the Crimea campaign isn't primarily about Russia's export income. It's about something the money can't fix, the ability to physically move things to the front. You can have all the rubles in the world, and it doesn't matter if the diesel can't cross the canal. The Institute for the Study of War spotted the synergy months ago and named it precisely. The long-range strikes are cutting how much fuel Russia can produce, while the mid-range strikes on Crimea and the occupied South are cutting Russia's ability to transport the fuel it still has. Squeeze production with one hand, squeeze delivery with the other. And the place where delivery is most vulnerable, the choke point where a handful of bridges carry everything, is exactly the peninsula Ukraine spent June taking apart. Then early July arrived, and the pressure jumped a level. Over 6 days at the start of the month, Ukraine's drone unit struck Crimea's power grid again and again, 38 hits on energy nodes by Brovdy's own count in under a week. And on July 6th, the switch finally flipped. A blackout rolled across the entire peninsula, every city, every district. Simferopol, the administrative capital, went dark. Sevastopol had already been cutting street lighting and canceling ferry services and banning outdoor gatherings for weeks, but this was the whole grid stuttering at once. A state of emergency, already in place from earlier strikes, deepened, and in the same window, an overnight strike on the city of Kerch, right at the foot of the great bridge Putin personally opened in 2018, killed a civilian and wounded others. Picture what that stacks into. No fuel to sell, rail bridges broken and rebroken, a 10-kilometer traffic jam that satellites caught forming as people tried to funnel out over the Kerch Bridge because it's become the only reliable way off the peninsula and everyone knows it. Ferries burned, fuel banned from crossing the Kerch Bridge itself on security grounds, so that some drivers now smuggle their own gasoline over in jerry cans, capped at 100 liters a vehicle. And now the lights going out region-wide. This is what isolation actually looks like when it stops being a slogan and becomes a Tuesday. And I want to close a loop I opened earlier about the patience, about hitting the repair train, because that's the piece that reveals the real theory of this campaign. Russia's entire adaptation strategy for 4 years has been redundancy and repair. Build a bypass, lay a pontoon, reroute the convoy, fix the tank. The Russian oil sector survived by leaning on Soviet-era overcapacity and patching what broke faster than Ukraine could break it. The bet was always that Russia could absorb damage faster than Ukraine could inflict it. What Ukraine is testing this summer, in Crimea specifically, is whether it can finally invert that math, strike often enough, precisely enough, and with enough drones coming off its own production lines that the repairs never catch up. Hit the bridge, then hit the crew that comes to fix the bridge. Make reconstitution itself the target. That's a different war than the one Russia prepared for. Does it end the war? No. Let me be clear about that, because I won't insult you with a fantasy. Crimea is not about to be liberated by drones over a canal. Russia still holds the peninsula, still holds the Kerch Bridge, still has the land corridor along the Azov coast that no single strike can sever because it's hundreds of kilometers of dispersed road. Ukraine has always been better at hitting the bridge, a single fixed point, than at closing the whole sprawling corridor. That gap is real, and it hasn't closed. But look at what it's already doing to the tempo. May was reportedly Russia's worst month for territorial gains since late 2023. The front line, for all the noise, is close to a standstill. Russian soldiers near some southern sectors have been reduced to hauling supplies the last stretch to the front on foot because even motorcycles can't survive the drones. And a war that can't move forward, on a peninsula that can't keep its lights on, funded by an oil income that only holds up because of a crisis in the Middle East that could ease at any moment, that is not the picture of strength the Kremlin is selling. It's a machine running on a very specific set of external luck, and Ukraine is methodically attacking every part of it that isn't luck. So here's the question I'd leave you with, the one I keep turning over. For 4 years, the story of this war has been Russia's ability to absorb, to take damage, repair, and grind on regardless. What happens to that story the first time the repair train doesn't get through? Because Ukraine just spent a summer proving it can find the repair train, and a peninsula is only as strong as the last bridge still standing on it. This is Professor Alex. I'll see you in the next one.